if you've clicked on this video thinking it's about furries, then I'm sorry to disappoint, that's another video. We are actually talking about the movie The Furies. This is a 2019 slasher fest by director and writer Tony D'Aquino. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of slasher films, generally speaking. I find them very samey. There are a few exceptions. There are ones that I like that do try and do something different with the genre, and I'm pleased to say that this one does, although it does have elements from a lot of other projects, as we'll talk about. So what is the basic plot premise here? It mainly focuses on a group of young women, particularly one in particular, this character called Kayla, who have been abducted, and they have been placed in these kind of like boxes and then kind of dumped in this kind of the outback of Australia somewhere in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and they are being hunted by masked slashers, for a lack of a better word. Now there is a bit more to it than that. We'll kind of come on to it again in some of the when we go into a bit more deeper, but that is your basic kind of your plot premise. So I've got to say, I think watching this movie and having watched a lot of kind of lower budget kind of horror films and stuff, this being the director's first foray into kind of feature filmdom as a director, I was actually reminded of another kind of low budget horror film movie maker called Aaran, who made the Playing with Dolls series, also known as kind of Metal Face, I think. It has a very distinct kind of like washed out visual style. And this is very similar to that in regards to its kind of style. I actually thought it might have been the same director initially, but it isn't. So let's talk about a little bit more detail here about what works first of all. So I'm not going to go into kind of like spoiler territory here, but I will say there is an extra element at play in this movie. The movie sounds like it's fairly kind of a simplistic plot, and it is to a degree, but there is an extra element here that is added on about halfway through the movie, which kind of, let me just say, it's kind of it's referred to as the Beauty and the Beast element, that I thought was a really kind of neat twist and changed the kind of the dynamic between all parties involved, so to speak. And I thought it was a fun little twist that adds something kind of new to the genre. So although the actual premise is fairly simple and very reminiscent of the movie Predators. So if you've seen the movie Predators, it's essentially that kind of film, just with its added little twist. But there's an element here of Hostel as well, where we have this kind of like this kind of like, you know, underground company who is kind of putting the strings and controlling it. It basically reminds me of, as I say, Predators meets Hostel, with a touch of The Most Dangerous Game as well. But yeah, the actual plot, although it is relatively kind of very simple, this extra element added about halfway through it did add an extra layer of intrigue to the movie, which I felt without it would have kind of been somewhat of a humdrum plot, to be honest with you. But it does add an extra element which makes it kind of fun. I think the standout thing here is going to be the kind of the makeup effects and the gore. So we have all these kind of slashers, and they are all kind of made to look similar to some other slashers that we've known. For example, there's one that looks very much like Leatherface and things like this. You know, so they're quite fun. They're kind of their decor, if you like, is actually pretty interesting. And there are some truly horrific deaths in this movie. And some very, very impressive kind of practical gore. And this movie does not shy away from some gruesome deaths. And let me tell you, I think there's some pretty horrific, some of the most horrific deaths put on screen in kind of like modern horror films, I would actually argue here. I think the acting here is for the most part pretty good. I think in particular our main actress who plays our kind of central character of Kayla, I think does an admirable job here of kind of making Airlie, Dodds, her name is, making a kind of quite a likeable kind of protagonist who, you know, you feel is really digging deep to kind of find that inner strength to kind of carry on. And I thought she did an admirable job here. I've got to say, I think the actual cinematography is brilliant in this movie as well. I think there's some really kind of like some nice kind of shots here. Particularly, Kayla was actually epileptic. There's a few instances where she has kind of seizures and stuff. And the way they do that, although it doesn't really look like any epilepsy I have seen, admittedly, but yeah, the actual kind of the way they kind of like have a sort of seizing up and the way the camera works is pretty good, I think. Yeah, and there are some kind of, you know, every kind of member of the kind of cast here is well kind of like sort of different between everyone else, so you don't get kind of mixed up with particular, you know, different characters and stuff like that. You all know who is who, and it's all kind of set in daylight as though. It kind of gives it this weird, certainly on Australian flavour, I feel, obviously because most of these kind of movies are set during the night. And sometimes I feel when the movies are set in the day, it does lose some of that that kind of creepy element. But for some reason, I feel this one didn't. It still kind of kept the kind of the tension going. I feel, despite everything being kind of very well lit. So what doesn't work for me? Okay, so I've got to say, I think as the movie goes on, some of the plot elements do come a little silly, and it does seem to be very reminiscent of certain other movies. I've mentioned Predators and Hostel, and it really does seem to take a lot from those two kind of series. So there are elements as the film goes on that I think just kind of stretches a little bit of kind of like credibility. I mean, it's a far-fetched film to begin with, so you know we kind of turn our brains off to a certain degree of these type of things, and it's kind of fun. But you still have to kind of believe what's happening is real in the context of the actual film, and I just think it maybe stretches it just a little bit far sometimes. Now, for all of the kind of the good characterization that I feel was done with the female characters, I feel is a little bit of a missed opportunity is done with some of the male characters here. Now, I feel this was done on purpose. Now, let me explain why. We essentially have two groups of people that have been out in this wilderness. We have our female victims, so to speak, and then we have our male slashers. Now, the way the male characters are, they're not characters. The male slashers are shown. They are not characters. They are depicted as simply like animals. They are masked, so we never kind of see the humanity in their faces. They never speak. And the issue that I have with them is that as the movie progresses, we learn more about the kind of the plot and kind of the relationship between the people that are involved in this. But it's only ever from we see that the women are getting kidnapped. We see that how they are potentially linked to other kind of characters within this movie. But we don't get any information about the kind of the male characters. And I was thinking, well, is it the same with the male characters? Are these people that have been kind of kidnapped and forced to do this, or are they kind of doing it off their own volition? And there's an element here, without kind of giving anything away, that makes you think, oh, maybe the male characters are also kind of having kind of somewhat being forced to do this because they have kind of consequences if things potentially don't go their way. But there's no information. We have no idea, and I think it's very easy to just kind of paint these kind of our male villains, our antagonists, just these kind of like these hulking brutes that have these grotesque masks on and don't speak and just kind of grunt and stuff, and therefore are just kind of more looked at as animals, as creatures. But at the end of the day, they're kind of still male characters. They are still human beings, and we don't have any information about what they think about it all, and are they there, through some type of kind of the similar situation to the women or not? We don't know. So that to me was a choice made by writer to director, but I feel it kind of was a little bit of an emotional manipulation because we're not meant to give a shit about these male characters, and I can't help thinking, but what about them? It was kind of left unanswered questions as well. And then we kind of get the end of the movie, which I feel is really just kind of going down the very, very similar line to Hostel in regards to what actually happens and that kind of series of films. So I feel this movie, although it is a really interesting and fun concept and does have some originality to it, you still can't help but think they're so similar to kind of other films that we have seen before. But this movie is very kind of well made on a technical level, especially for a relatively inexperienced kind of director who's only kind of done more or less kind of shorts and stuff like that. I feel the action and the choreography, the kind of the chasings are all fantastic. The kind of the practical makeup is awesome. Like I said, this is a slasher fest. You've got a whole heap of kind of interesting kind of slasher kind of power and kind of looks. And the gore here is second to none, with some truly gruesome kills. But a little nitpick here, some of the kills that we do see, in particular the first one, wouldn't have killed someone, and this is like an insta-death, and I'm thinking, that may have killed someone eventually. I mean, it's gross, but this wouldn't be an insta-kill. It would have been something that someone may have bled out from a, you know, a period of time, but it's not something that would have killed someone straight away. It might have put them in shock and stuff, but yeah, you'll kind of know when you see it. It's the first kind of kill that we sort of see on screen. It's just like, it looks gross, but that wouldn't have killed someone. Not straight away, at least. Anyway, but overall, this is a fun slasher romp, if you want to say that. A violent, bloody mess of a romp, but a fun kind of romp nonetheless. That does kind of lend itself to more movies kind of down the line that I would certainly be interested in watching. I enjoyed this one, despite if there is some kind of flaws in regards to maybe the script. But I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.